Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very special guest, a legendary guest, indeed. Some said I couldn't get him, but of course I could. Shuhei Yoshida, welcome to the show.
Yes. Hi, Colin. It's been a while. Well, actually, this is my first time joining your show, right?
And it is, yeah. I have a really bad relationship with Sony PR, so it would have not been possible for us to have gotten you before you left Sony.
Well, I don't know about it, but for how long have you been doing this? You left kind of funny. Which year was it?
2017, I left.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's been
8 years. It'll be 8 years next month. Yeah.
But I remember you started out with some different subjects podcasts, didn't you?
Yeah, I started doing some history and political stuff. Mm-hmm. We did that for about 6 months, and it made me really unhappy. It was lucrative, but it made me really unhappy. So I came back to games in the fall of 2017, and then we launched Sacred Symbols in 2018.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, so this is the 7th year as a Sacred Symbol.
Yep, it is. Yeah, in July it'll be our anniversary.
So. Great, thank you for doing it. Even though I left PlayStation, I applaud you being doing PlayStation podcast.
Thank you.
Because you have such a deeper insight into video game, not just games, but the business of video game and game development and how studios doing. So it must be must be providing insight that other shows wouldn't be able to. So it's a great addition.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's very nice of you to say. Yeah, we have a nice little network of, I do the PlayStation show. We have guys do the Nintendo show. We have an Xbox show. And it's very old IGN, 15 years ago IGN kind of.
Oh, wow. Great.
Yeah. So it's good to see you. I haven't spoken to you. We DM back and forth, but I have not seen you or spoken to you in person or on video since I would say 2016. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice to see you. That's a different world, of course. Congratulations on a really wonderful career at Sony. You recently obviously announced that you were leaving. Everyone's obviously bummed about that, but you've had some time to reflect. I had a very productive day today, Shu, because I woke up and I put my earbuds in and I was cleaning and doing chores around the house, and I was listening to your interview with Greg, and then I listened to your interview with MinMax.
Oh, thank you.
Because I didn't want to be redundant. I want to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I really liked how Ben asked different questions from what Greg asked. And if you can ask different questions, further, that would be really fun for me.
I have a whole list. I have on the left side of the list, it's like things I wanted to pull at that were on the other ones. And then a bunch of things that I want to talk to you about. And like you said, I'm a PlayStation nerd in a major way. So I have so many things I want to ask you, and you're a little more untethered now that you're not at Sony. So
yes,
right. I was telling the audience recently when the Kind of Funny interview came up, it's like, you should interview Shu. And I'm like, I don't know that Shuhei Yoshida was so disciplined, like such a disciplined, media trained person. Mm-hmm. I could get things out of Adam Boyes. I can get things out of Gio, I can get things out of, Anil or something like that, but I couldn't get anything out of you. But now I'm listening to these interviews and I'm like, wow, you are saying so much. So it's really a great honor to be able to talk to you today. And I appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Well, the big difference is now I can talk about my opinions, right? My personal opinions. When I was part of PlayStation, of course I wouldn't, talk about my personal opinions, right? Because people may take it as a company position. So that's the biggest difference. But I'm not going to talk about the confidential information. So
of course,
I have to say, yeah.
I might try, but, we'll see. I got to give it up, though, because Ben asked you a really great question about Nicolas Doucet at the Game Awards not saying, like, going out of his way to not talk about Nintendo. You made a really great point that I had never considered, which is like, it's quite as simple as not wanting to be a headline. Like, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of an obvious. That's obvious. So I get it. I get when you're inside the beast, you got to be a little bit more careful. I read your interview with GamesBeat as well, and that's making the rounds today. Yeah. And the really interesting thing about that is you talking kind of explicitly about kind of being given an ultimatum
Well, I wasn't, be careful. I talked about Nico being careful. I wasn't being careful. I wasn't anticipating that became the headline.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, I also said that when Jim suggested if I would do the indie work, that position was created just for me. And I really, really wanted to do it. I thought that was a great idea because I was very concerned at that time, 5 years ago, you remember, PlayStation was criticized that from media and from indie community that PlayStation doesn't care about indies. That, I believe that was not the case, but that was a perception. And, especially in big shows during end of PS4 era, the big shows that we put together look like, just focus on AAAs and first-party titles. And, people, indie developers and indie publishers, they rely on digital sales. So, selling games on PlayStation Store was the only way they were able to put their game, to the hands of consumers. So, how store handled, showing of games was crucial for their life. I was very concerned because I was a huge fan of indie games, how important it is for the industry and the future of the industry. And one of the biggest platforms in the industry, PlayStation should be doing a lot, to support the indies. So when Jim suggested, to do something, he asked me to, I want you to do something for the situation to support indies. That came with the message that, and you leave the first party, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I guess
but I really wanted to do that. Yeah. Go ahead.
I guess a lot of people, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I guess a lot of, I'm certainly confused knowing you and your resonance within PlayStation first party and you overseeing what is undoubtedly the best eras, PS3 and PS4, I think, of first party output. I think a lot of people are confused, like why they would even give you that ultimatum, like what, or like give you that option. It's like, what was that all about? Why wouldn't you just stay in that position? It's kind of strange. And even the big games that came out after you had left, like The Last of Us Part 2, Horizon 2, like Returnal, these are your games. I mean, these are at least games that you greenlit. So I'm a little confused. I think I'm speaking for a lot of us when I'm like, how do you feel about that? The level of confusion we feel about that on the outside.
Well, that's Colin Moriarty. You know how things work, right? So many of the games came out after I left first party, or started while I was managing first party, including, people talk about Concord. Concord, I started signed the prototype contract with, probably Monsters, Harold Ryan set up a new shop, like a headquarter kind of company after he left Bungie, and set up 3 studios underneath probably Monsters, and one which was the Firewalk. And when I visited and met with people at Firewalk, the really small team at that time, core team, felt like a really experienced, talented people to work on online games. So, so that was under my time Concord started. And, same way, Helldiver 2 did great last year, launch. But, Helldiver 2 was one of the, targeted as one of the launch titles of PS5.
Right. There's actually I don't know if you've seen it leak, but there is a trailer that leaked of Helldivers 2 before it was even revealed, with the old SCE iconography on it. So it's that old. It's not even like the PlayStation Studios logo. It's like the old pop-up of just the text. And so that game had clearly been percolating for a while.
Yeah. Well, time well spent, so the Returnal and Ratchet came out, within like 6 months of launch, and team at Arrowhead, and, studio management teams and Harman really supported the project to be the game that launched last year. So that's great. And in terms of, so Jim didn't really explain to me other than, he was worried about the situation about indies. And to his credit, he really supported after, I took the job, within the company, he, always supported the indies initiative and sent a message within the company that it is very important. And in terms of supporting our partners, including, indies. So, I really appreciate Jim doing it. And my interpretation was, as Jim took over the company as CEO, and there are a few of us who grew up with Jim, the same generation, and worked with him for longest time. And when Jim was the global head of sales and marketing, Sean Layden was chairman of our studio, and I was the president of our studios. And, oftentimes, when Jim from sales and marketing standpoint made some request, we'd say, no, we are not doing it. Very, because we are friends and very easily said no. So probably Jim wanted to create his own team with the younger generation under him. And so, Jim, Sean left before me and a couple other things, people in the Volvo Studio management team from the same generation left. And when it came to my term, I really appreciated he suggested I do this indie work, that the position he created.
I think it's important work too. And it's funny how things like ebb and flow, because at the late PS3 generation into Vita and PS4, there was that huge indie push. Mm-hmm. PlayStation loves indies and all of that. And a lot of great stuff from that era, the Guacamelee guys and Mercenary Kings and all the sorts of stuff. And then, it did kind of go away. And then it had to kind of get revived. And I so much has changed since you and I have really spoken, but I co-own an indie studio now. We've put out 6 games and on PSN, and it's a space that I care about because it's how we're going to succeed or not. But also I've learned so much about the industry just by doing it that I would have never known. So I'm glad that you go to bat for indies, because that's a lot of what I play.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I know it's what you play too. So I want to pull in a couple other threads before I get into all the random shit that I want to talk to you about things that I heard you talk about on the other shows. And one of the interesting things you said, talk to Greg, that I thought was fascinating and I wanted to revisit was you talking about Killzone. So the shooters, Killzone, Resistance, and SOCOM.
SOCOM, yeah.
And how you kind of saw at that time that it might not have been worth competing in that space with first party assets, because you kind of just have these other competitors, Call of Duty and then Battlefield, and now a bunch of others as well. But now we're in a situation under Jim Ryan and Herman, and like you said, with Firewalk and some of the stuff spooling up late in your tenure, about kind of getting more back into that space, or at least trying to compete in that space again. I wonder, do you think that, looking back, do you think it was a mistake to walk away from not those franchises, but that idea of doing online centric stuff? Or do you think that was the right call? Because it seems like the embryo of that is needed very much now at Sony, and it's not really there. So they're trying to kind of get it, whether it's with Bungie and so on. So I'm curious how you revisit that choice, if you feel like that was the right one to make.
Yeah. So in the same interview, Greg's interview, I think I explained the way first party was managed under my time and the way things, were managed under Herman time was, made a big difference in my mind. Couple of things. One thing was, so in my time, I was managing software development, like, software business within the company, even though we are not exposed to the outside as a separate business. Which means, I had a finite annual budget, several $100s, millions of dollars to assign, allocate to projects. And I had to earn enough revenue from these titles to cover the cost of development and marketing, like an internal, like a virtual company. So I had the title president. In that situation, looking at the market of online games. So we released, SOCOM, Resistance and Killzone. I felt, we released good games and the people liked it, but competing online game on just one platform is really severely, what's the word? In a more difficult position. Handicapped.
There you go. Yeah. One arm tied behind your back, kind of.
Because online game, you want lots of people to play, right?
Right.
And there are already, successful games like Call of Duty on PlayStation, and and the online games seems to be the market that winner takes it all, kind of. When the game is successful, more people will play it, kind of market. So instead of trying to trying a new game or, continuing a series that we had in that, huge red ocean, we should stick to what we know, we can do well.
Right.
And we know, we can help the platform to succeed with. And the change after I left was, the overall change is Sony, bit by bit, after Kaz Hirai became the head of Sony, and Yoshida-san and Totoki-san came in, had really good understanding of the video game market. Before Kaz's time, Sony headquarters were managed by people from electronics business or some other software business, didn't really understand the video game market. So, Kaz and Ken and, those people, Andrew House, tried to kind of let us do our job. We know what we are doing, and contribute to Sony as a, arm's length kind of relationship. But, after Kaz's days, Yoshida-san really studied hard about the video game business and started to be more involved in PlayStation business. And I felt that one of the things, we are criticized when I was managing first party was, PlayStation first party has good, single player games, but they don't have successful online service games.
Right.
And especially from the investors. Investors love service games, right? During that time and, during the COVID time, investors really wanted to put a lot of money to invest into new startup that did service games because, service game for investors, they, once successful, has a very sustainable, predictable, stable revenue and profit. And on the contrary, when you have only worked on single player game, when the game comes out, it's a big, revenue and profit that year, and comes down. And when new games comes out, goes up, back up. But, investors do not like that. They like more predictability and, sustainability. So that was a criticism onto Sony, who owned, PlayStation business. And when I suspected when Jim took over, got the CEO job for PlayStation, probably there's a conversation between Sony headquarters and Jim that is this something you can try? And Sony, to their credit, they gave a lot of new money to SIE for Herman to invest. They didn't ask, I don't think they asked Herman to stop doing or reduce doing single player and move the money to work on service game. They said that continue doing what you do well on single player development, but in addition, try this, service games, and gave money a lot. And I think the size of investment by SIE on first party products probably have doubled, from my time to Herman's time.
Right.
And the another thing is, during my time, one of our biggest missions that we had as first party is create an exclusive, PlayStation exclusive title to become the reason for people to purchase hardware. And we kind of, from software teams, wanted to release games on PC, but we are only allowed to release smaller games to release on PC. You remember the Helldiver 1 was released on PC and quite successful. But, I had an agreement not to release a, big title on PC during that time. But as the game size and investment increased, and so the company changed as, everybody saw that after a couple of years, it's safe to release even the AAA titles on PC. And that will do many things, like reach new audience who do not own console, especially in regions that console gaming is not as popular as PC gaming. And those people become fan of game IP. When the new game of that IP comes out, they might be convinced to purchase, PlayStation for the future. And of course, add additional income, because porting to PC is way, way cheaper than creating the original title. So it's, almost like printing money. And that helps to invest in new titles that the size of investment has increased. So, things have changed. Our policy has changed. Market force has changed. Technology has changed. And so all these things, and in addition, not related to service games, but one thing I really appreciated and respected what Herman and team did was I, for one, had no interest in getting movies or TV show made based on our game IP. If anything, I thought that Hollywood will make a really bad movie based on game IP. Right. And kind of tarnish the brand, if anything. That was my thinking. But after, I left and Herman and Assad, started, PlayStation Productions, so many great movies and TV show made. And so the investment to service games and, expand games reach by making PC versions. And I understand they are working on some mobile, games with partners as well, and creating, TV show and movies, good TV shows and good movies. There are lots of new things have been, tried, and many of them successful. So I really, really appreciate it, and that's one of the reasons. So I really enjoyed managing first party. I was the president of our studio for 11 years, but 11 years, the same person managing. Right. There's, good things, but, I can only be one person, right? So I look at things from one perspective. So I really enjoyed and I wanted to continue if I had a chance. However, at the same time, I knew back of my head that maybe it's good to have a new person comes in with very fresh ideas and perspective and experience, and especially younger generation like Herman and Scott Lodi. These people come in and try new things. So all that was happening. So people, I got lots of comments on Twitter today after Dean Takashi's article came out that, well, Jim was bad. I do not really think that badly about Jim. If anything, I really appreciate how he helped me to do the indie job and supported for the last 5 years for the whole company to focus on that.
Yeah, it's well said. And it's interesting because the PC stuff, there's so much there. I've been writing down some of the things you've been saying. The PC stuff I find really interesting because I've been really bullish about. My audience gets mad at me. A predominant number of them get mad at me because I want even more PC push with even single player games day and date, because I think what we're seeing, and I wonder if you have any insight into this, is like you said, these are separate markets. Yeah. And I think that the PC games that Sony releases are actually selling worse than the previous ones. Like Days Gone did really well, and the original Spider-Man and Horizon. They're not doing worse today for any other reason than the novelty, I think, is gone. And it shows that there are really just two groups of people, and they're not necessarily going to migrate. So you might as well just go get them. Is that kind of what the evidence or what the data shows, is that there's not much of a loss to? In other words, people think that putting a game on PC means no one's going to want a PlayStation anymore. But I'm like, no, I just don't know that these people were that interested to begin with. And if they are, the only way you can really go and get them is to aggressively go and get them.
You here, you know that when publishers release games on multi-platforms, especially on PC, the number one market countries their games sell is either US or China. China is a huge PC game market, and China is growing but still very small console market. And in order to reach audience in countries like China, PC is crucial. PC SKU. Yeah. So I believe, having PC SKU really reach new audience. And after, not, releasing day and day, right? Taking 1 year or 2 years, or sometimes 3 or 4 years after the release of original PlayStation version, I don't think, that hurts. Probably people who have purchased on PlayStation of that game would have purchased already.
I wonder how far you take that logic. A pretty controversial thing was, I thought it was really interesting. I wonder what you guys learned from it, but is releasing Lego Horizon on Switch, which is somewhat unprecedented for the brand. Do you feel now, again, with the new Switch, I tell my audience, I'm like, why not just release the Uncharted trilogy on that? Why not put some older games, Bloodborne or something? Not that that's ever going to be touched again, but do you feel like that logic tracks? Do you think Sony should investigate eventually getting games on other console platforms, older legacy stuff? Or do you think that keeping that walled garden continues to be the best strategy?
I was very excited when I learned that the, Lego Horizon is coming out on Switch. And I felt that especially Lego, game, would be really good fit, on Switch platform. And I didn't see the game becoming a hit product on Switch platform. Part of that might be the, Metacritic score was not that high compared to a couple other Lego games, even though I personally enjoyed playing the game. So it's a bit of disappointment for me. However, I think depending on the type of games, PS Studio should try accessing different kind of market. Especially when that market platform does not feel directly competing with PlayStation platform. So Switch 2 is very interesting. We are kind of anticipating, or we read on the internet that performance of Switch 2 may be like, PS4 or, could be, better than PS4. So we don't know. But if that's the case, all the PS4 generation games from all companies could come out on the platform, right? So the one generation game, third-party games, and potentially Xbox or PlayStation games might come out on the platform. So what that means to the owner of PlayStation, and is Switch 2 become directly competitive platform, Switch and, generation, we felt, PlayStation was directly competing with, Xbox, but not necessarily Switch, lots of people owned, both platforms and used, differently, different times. And, of course, Switch, attracted to more younger audience and family audience. And there are some distinct, type of games came out on two different platforms. But if Switch 2 becomes more core audience platform, what does it mean? It's very interesting to me as well.
Because I think from the outside, I read and I think this is somewhat accurate, the way Sony, and you're saying this, is the way Sony looks at Nintendo and Switch 2 is going to be different than the way they look at Microsoft and Xbox. You can even see that with the licensing stuff like Freedom Wars, right? Being revived by Bandai Namco. They didn't put it on Xbox, but they put it on Switch, right? And I looked at that and I'm like, that's so interesting. Or the Metal Gear Solid Delta is going to have the Ape Escape stuff only in the PlayStation version, but not in the Xbox version. And I'm like, so it seems like they still look at that as like, we want to draw a wedge between us and them. But I love what you said about Switch and Switch 2, especially, Shu, because I feel like it's actually the perfect situation for even the hardcore PlayStation fan that's like, I don't want my games anywhere else. It's like, well, you're never going to lose, in quotes, your PS5 games because the Switch 2 won't be able to play them. But everything else, so like Astrobot's not going to go over because it won't be able to work. But Infamous Second Son is just sitting there. Like you could actually extract maybe a few million, tens of millions of dollars in revenue by just selling it over there. I feel like there's no real threat there. And it's something I'd like to see because I just think the Nintendo fan, similar to the PC fan, is somewhat isolated. Like you said, younger, it's a first party machine. It's a platformer machine. There's different kinds of games there. I'm really eager to see if they play ball over there with some of this new stuff. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see the announcement. Nintendo is planning, beginning of April, one thing, if they have some secret feature of the hardware, because the last announcement, the only surprise to me was like a mice thing.
Right.
And all the other things seems to have been kind of talked about before the announcement. However, they didn't talk about the game lineup. So I'm really, really looking forward to see what kind of games will be announced at the show, and right after, maybe third party will be announcing their games, after Nintendo's shows. So to see the whole lineup of games, how many games are new and how many games are like a ports from, PS4 generation.
Right. Yeah, I'll be interested to see that too. I think they're in great shape. I'm so fascinated. You know what it reminds me of? Do you remember the PS3 Slim took so long to be announced that it started just walking off of off of factory floors and finding its way like unboxed, and people were selling them. Now I'm reading that Switch 2 has actually done this too, and I think people are buying it for like $40,000 or $50,000, like the actual hardware itself.
Really?
Yeah, because it's taking so long, and I think the game devs are a little frustrated at this point because I think they were supposed to already be able to show this stuff and they haven't been able to. But since we're talking about this and kind of the cross-platform stuff, I got to ask you.
Yeah,
you guys have, especially during your tenure at first party, Xbox in your sights, right? Very, very staunch competitor, especially in the 360 generation. Big selling games that Killzone and Resistance could never replicate Halo and Gears, for instance, at least in terms of saturation. It must be pretty weird to see their games on your platform now, right? And when I bought Pentiment last year, I think I said out loud, I'm like, this is surreal. Like, this is really weird. And I think it's only going to get more surreal when Halo and Gears and all of these things come over, which I think is going to happen this year. I got to know, what do you think about that? Because that's got to be some strange stuff for you. That's got to be that's a W, right? That's a win. I mean, that's a win.
I suspect Microsoft is the biggest publisher on PlayStation.
Yeah, between really? Minecraft, Call of Duty, Bethesda, and now all of their stuff. Absolutely. No doubt.
Yeah, that's a new time, right? That's a new time. And Microsoft has been working on more, shifting, looks like, they have shifted focus to Game Pass, right? And Game Pass is a service. And I observe that could be coming from the DNA of Microsoft as a company, like a software company and service company and, the cloud-based services like Office 365 everywhere on Macintosh and on mobile.
Right.
So, probably they would want, and they started saying, Xbox everywhere. Probably they are hoping that Game Pass service will become available in the future on all hardware, right? Like, Office service.
Right. I always thought Game Pass would come over before the a la carte games, but it went the other direction, which is interesting in my opinion. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. So they look like they went to different direction already. and having their games, on PlayStation is you asked, is it win? I think win for, PlayStation owners. They
Right.
didn't have an access.
It seems like a complete capitulation of the realities of the market. And like you said, I actually just did a video on this about how I think Microsoft got too aggressive in their acquisitions, and then they needed to sell their games on across platform, because now they've absorbed Bethesda and Activision and Blizzard and King. It's like, it's too much. You can't, it's like, as you were saying earlier, you can't really make these games on one platform. You especially can't do it on the smaller platform, so behind the subscription model.
I explained in one of the interviews that had been always my nightmare when I was managing first party. And luckily it didn't happen, during my time, that if PlayStation becomes minority platform, it's impossible to maintain the, first party development, because the best creators would leave. They are not just creatives. They are business people as well. And also they want their games to reach the biggest audience as possible. It's very natural. If a platform is minority, and if we are able to release a game on minority platform only, it's unsustainable to unretainable of all these creative great teams. So that was the nightmare. So, looking at the install base of Xbox hardware, I think it's kind of natural to understand what they are doing. And the field is pretty straightforward in explaining the situation.
Right. Yeah, it's a changing world. I think ultimately, in the long term, PlayStation will probably be in a similar situation, just in that I think it'll be streaming on a TV in, the 2040s or something. But I loved your answer. I think it was to Greg. It might have been to Ben, where you were saying like Sony makes hardware, and that's kind of what we do. And I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me too, that the status quo will be kept. I feel like these conversations about like this platformless future and all this, like this goes back to the PS3 era. People were wondering if the PS4 would have a disk drive. I mean, people, like there was all sorts of, we're always way ahead of where the market seems to actually want to be. And so I think Sony's kind of in a decent position, and PS5 and PS4 are selling comparable to each other. So, and the other fascinating thing is just how much money Sony is making now on PlayStation, more than ever. As profit one of my favorite stats is that I think Sony in the PS5 era so far has made more in profit on PlayStation 5 than they did on PS1 and PS2 combined, which is just absolutely insanity, like insane. And they're doing it without the big games as a service in the first party. They're doing it with a dearth of first party releases. Everything's kind of changed. To kind of bring it back to something we brought up earlier, is the idea of going towards, so we have this single player provenance of PlayStation, Uncharted, Infamous, whatever. Is part of the initiative of going, and you're saying that the shareholders and the board and everyone's kind of paying attention, looking at the numbers. Are they basically saying like, we're making 30% off of Call of Duty and off of Fortnite and off of all these things? We could just have it all. But at the same time, it's what you're saying. You don't have to really risk anything to get that 30%, as opposed to risking it all, like you did, with Firewalk, for instance, in Concord, and losing in a major way. Do you think that it's healthy for PlayStation 5 to be more of a third-party machine as it's become today, less reliant on its own products? Or do you think that its own products will continue to be really, really important to it?
I haven't looked at numbers in terms of, what's the percent share of first-party software on platform. I didn't feel the numbers have changed much from PS4 era to PS5 era. I really haven't paying attention to the numbers, so I could be wrong, but I always felt we had kind of minority, part of the platform, 15%, 20%, of all the softwares on platform. I could be wrong. The impression for people, I see people complaining that PS5 doesn't have games. I think they are specifically talking about PS5 exclusive games, because so many games at the beginning, a couple of years were cross-gen. Games came out on PS4 and PS5. And I think some people complaining about PS5 doesn't have games, not counting these games into their equation. And but looking at the, all the games available on PS5 generation, I don't know if first-party output has reduced from PS4 days.
Right. It seems like it has, but I think volume has grown too. Like, in other words, that there's just so many more games and more games are selling more. So I just
bigger
think
games, sales numbers are bigger now.
Right. Like it's like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 selling 2 million copies. That's like a really nice, solid. They're a Czech studio that spent $40 million. It's a bunch. They've already made their money back. I think expectations are a little different too. When I worked at IGN PlayStation during the PS3 and Vita era and the early PS4 era, you could almost play everything. That was like anything of consequence, you could play it. And now I got to let things go all the time. I'm in and this is why I cannot relate to the no games argument, even though I know people are talking about first party games. Is I just feel like I still have to make really hard choices and not play things because I can't get to it all. So,
Yeah, each game has become bigger as well. It takes longer, right?
Right. Too big in some sense.
Big. Yeah.
That's why I loved playing like Dead Space Remake or Resident Evil 4 Remake and some of these other games where I'm like, 15 hours. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Linear.
I agree. Yeah. We want to complete the game, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some other stuff here. I have a bunch of things. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was like first party acquisitions. I was looking at the dates and kind of lining this up. So you were in charge of first party when Sony bought Media Molecule, Sucker Punch, and then I think Insomniac happened right around the time you were leaving, right?
Right before I left.
So how did you? What goes into this? What goes into identifying the proper targets for acquisition? These all are logical studios for Sony to buy, in my opinion. You're buying Media Molecule right after, or right when Little Big Planet 2 is coming out. Sucker Punch right after Infamous comes out, or Infamous 2, I want to say actually, and then Insomniac right around the Spider-Man launch. How does that all begin, and how do you? You're talking about managing money, right? You obviously have to go to the board and to this, to all these people and be like, we need a big amount of money now to go and chase this team. Talk to me a little bit about that process and how you kind of absorb these teams.
Yeah, that's Colin Moriarty question. Thank you. No one else asked that kind of question. And I love, answering this. Yeah. So, well that in my days, the acquisition, how I approached the, developer acquisition was very, very conservative. We always needed history of working together as publisher and developer, and we needed successful games IP created between us, and I needed to see the chemistry of people managing the studio and producers on our end, and we know that we have a very positive, trusting relationship, and we have the history of creating successful IPs together, and we can agree on the future like a roadmap of titles. And to me, acquiring a developer after successful couple of games with them is, in my mind, rearranging commercial, financial arrangement. Instead of signing contract each time and paying development cost and paying royalty after the sales of the game, we put some money from the future value we will get from releasing future titles day one. Because we have the history, we have the confidence of the future game's success. We as Sony feels comfortable paying up in advance of some of the money today, and we don't have to negotiate the term every time the game finishes and moving on to the next. And the arrangement changed that they can focus on developing games without their concern about when this game is coming to the end. Developer always have to prepare for the pitch for the next title. And that's very stressful, and that can take precious resource from the core team might still be, polishing the game that they are trying to finish. So, and in the development cost and the bandwidth, monthly burn becomes so large that the management of the studio got really concerned about the potential of, finishing a game, and the sales and loyalty happens later, and loyalty comes only after the recoupment, typically, and that could take, many months. And while they are doing it, pitching the new titles, might take a few months, and they have to keep supporting all the people in the studio. So that's lots of stress on, developers management. So agreeing the acquisition removes all these concerns. And they get, money from the acquisition. That's very nice. But, in most cases, management of the developer were creators as well. So they are not taking the money and leave.
Right. They have stability to make something new.
Yeah. And they'll continue to work on future titles. So that's in all cases, starting from Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, Media Molecule, Insomniac, Guerrilla Games, all these acquisitions were followed that path. And after I left, things changed. First, the COVID happened, and lots of money came in, almost like a free money. People call it stupid money.
Right.
And all this rush to acquire developers started to happen, and that must have put a lot of pressure on the management of publishers who are looking at potential. So that might be a reason that my approach of a very conservative way has gone. It seems like, the acquisitions are actually the Housemarque and Bluepoint were the same
right.
way.
They made They made perfect sense. Yeah.
But other acquisition was a bit, surprise to me.
Yeah, I'd say so.
To be honest.
It's funny because a lot of people make fun of me for saying it, but I'm like, no, Sony really only buys organically, with the exception of the more recent studios and obviously Psygnosis in the beginning, because there was nothing there yet. But like you said, like getting with the likes of Naughty Dog after Crash and into Jack and Daxter, or getting with, Santa Monica is a founded studio, but, Polyphony later on, and Guerrilla Big with Pursuit Force. And like, there's something there to work off of. And I thought it was very peculiar when Sony bought Bungie specifically because it was so expensive, but also Firewalk and Haven, those acquisitions seem to me, like you were saying, to kind of stave off competition and distraction. And I described it as like being like you're having a one night stand instead of getting married the way it used to be. You're going to get married, you're going to take it real slow, we're going to court each other, all of that. Now it's happening much quicker. And I think that those products are kind of, we don't know about Fair Games yet, but Firewalk blew up. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they weren't genetically PlayStation, in my opinion. But the Bungie acquisition to me is strange too, just because I feel like Sony bought Bungie for that expertise, and then Sony now runs the company. So like Sony just took the company over. So now it's like, so you didn't get anything. And so I really liked the more deliberate approach that you guys pursued. Were there any studios that got away that you would have wanted to keep either as a second party or bring into the first party? I think Quantic Dream always seemed like an obvious one to me, although it didn't seem like the relationship between Sony and Quantic Dream was great at the end. I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting that. I know that from some PR people I talked to in the past. Supermassive seemed to be another one that might have been an option. Arrowhead, I guess now is the major option, but they don't maybe seem to be interested. I don't know. Are there any studios that might have gotten away?
That's a really good question. In my mind, I cannot, think of any particular examples. In terms of Quantic, I really loved working with them. I like kind of games they are making. I thought they are working on something new, something for the future, like looking. it may not be the biggest genre as yet, but that might become grow, or they look like a pioneer. But there were some differences of level of affection that the people involved on the Sony side towards the certain people at Quantic.
Yeah, I wonder who. Yeah.
That probably was the reason we didn't, get into that conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard that as well. That I remember actually, it was after Beyond, but before Detroit, where even some of the PR people that I knew at Sony were being like, yeah, they're just kind of, there's trouble between these two sides. And I didn't really know much more about that. Supermassive seemed to be a company that kind of took Quantic's place for a little while. Until Dawn, I think, is the original Until Dawn is excellent. So yeah, it's interesting that, and then of course Insomniac. So I did the history of Insomniac in 2012, 2013, and I talked to them about, they were independent at that point. In fact, the story is called Always Independent. But you ended up buying them. How did that go? It seemed like, is my interpretation that Insomniac realized that grass isn't always greener? They finally realized that and kind of came back to Sony, because it seemed they were obsessed with we want to do other things. We want to own our IP. We made Ratchet. We made Spyro. We made Resistance. We don't own anything. And then I think they realized that it was a lot harder than they thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, you know, very well. Yeah. Ted wanted to try new things. He wanted to own the IP, do their own thing, and, keep the independence. So we have really, we always kept a good relationship, even though they are working on other platform projects. I think we were able to continue to work with them on a Ratchet, products. And we always appreciated that. And after the success of first Spider-Man, the conversation came to happen. And my interpretation was, because the company Insomniac has grown so big, now they have over 400 people. It's amazing. Yeah. They started, just, 2 or 3 of them when we worked, with them. So keeping independence is become really tasking, I guess. After the success of Spider-Man, reuniting kind of, and we have, had now Ratchet and Spider-Man, we agreed on the future roadmap of product. So I think the conversation came to the point that we can agree on terms, and they were happy to join PlayStation.
Yeah, $227 million, I think. That's a steal for Insomniac, in my opinion. But that's the budget of one of their games. So pretty nice. And you don't have to worry about anyone courting them anymore, distracting them. Or didn't at the time. The other side of the shoe that I wanted to ask you about, and this is the harder part, I guess, is the closure of studios. You also had to oversee studios being closed in your time. I think, so Incognito, Big, Liverpool, Zipper, Evolution, and Cambridge all closed while you were in charge. How do you know when it's time to, and I don't say that as an insult, but how do you know when it's time to kind of move on and pull the plug? I think some of them made a lot of sense to me, like Big. It's Pursuit Force and then into Little Deviants. Okay, I can see maybe there's not a future. Zipper was one of them where I'm like, I feel like they kind of got done dirty just because of SOCOM's release during the PSN outage. And then they kind of pivot to Unit 13, which I thought was really good, actually. How do you balance all that?
Studio closure is a big decision, and it's really difficult decision every time. And each one I clearly remember. What was the question?
Yeah, like how do you know when it's time to say this isn't working? Yeah, this isn't working.
We tried to make it work before, we came to the decision clearly. And we must have tried a couple of times and came to that conclusion. One thing is, as I said, we had the annual budget I had to allocate to all the project, including, studios. And sometimes a new project on new platform like console platform required large investment to a new team or grow the studio, making successful franchise. And sometimes I might not be able to support that project unless we take money out from other places. It could be, from external project that we finished, but if we don't have that kind of situation, we might look at internal teams to cut down on the number of people to save money or to shut down altogether to be able to invest in other project. So I think we always looked at the priority of project and we just do not look at one project success or failure. We also look at the future potential of the team, what they have accomplished, and the situation, the platform, the market situation. So we just didn't look at the numbers, but look at all the angles and see if we keep investment on this place is better than doing some other things.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's got to be very difficult. Because I think that a lot of it is just place and time sort of stuff where games are good, but not received well. They're, Unit 13 launching on the Vita is not really going to help Zipper because it's not going to sell well there. So there's nothing to really, and then obviously the burn rate of all these studios and keeping everyone employed. It's got to be a very...
I like the game, Unit 13.
Yeah.
I really like the modular kind of mission.
It was perfect for Vita. It was perfect.
Yeah.
It was, other than Killzone Mercenary, I think it's the strongest shooter. It's third person, but I think it's the strongest shooter on the platform. And underrated. And yeah, just perfect. It's good for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, or it was. It's interesting to hear you kind of wax about that a little bit, because I know that that's probably a very difficult part of the job, is managing that. And you obviously want all of your games to sell well. So it's not for a lack of trying.
And all the team to continue and grow and work on new things. Yeah.
Right. What role does or did second party play in all of this, as far as, so we talked a little bit about, the Sucker Punch made the first Infamous game as a first party, the Sly games as a first party, or a second party rather. Spider-Man was a second party game, and so on and so forth. What role does that play? To me, and I wonder if you think this too from the outside now, it seems like second party plays a bigger role on PlayStation than it has in a long time. And I would consider second party and timed third party. So you have games like Stellar Blade, Neo, and so on and so forth. Silent Hill 2, whatever. It seems like Sony has done it actually, although people beat up Sony these days for not managing their first party resources well, or we're waiting a long time for games. I do think the second party output has been there and been pretty good. And I wonder what role that plays in your mind in the ecosystem.
Well, internally, we use the terminology slightly differently. So when games are made by a developer, independent developer, and published by PlayStation, we call them first party product. Like before Housemarque was acquired, they are external developer, and our external producers manage the relations, and we funded the product and released the game first party. It was still first party titles, but externally developed. And we call second party when the company, independent company created the games, but pretty much funded the title or jointly funded title and IP owned by that company. The recent example is Stellar Blade,
right,
or Rise of the Ronin by Koei Tecmo. But still publishing was done by PlayStation. We call it second party.
Okay, got you.
So, yeah. And third party exclusive, we call it partner titles.
Right.
So some games like Final Fantasy 16 came out on PlayStation first, right? That was a third party exclusive title. So that's the terminology. And in terms of, so out of these, we always did lots of externally developed first party when, I was doing management, and they are still doing it. But the output from that, what we call second party, has increased in the, for the last few years. And I remember the first of the example was Neo and Neo 2. Mm-hmm. These games are created and published by Koei Tecmo in Japan and Asia probably, but outside Asia, in the US and Europe, were published by PlayStation. And that was a second party deal in our terminology. And that went very well. So the company continued the relations with Yasuda-san, Team Ninja team, to do the Rise of the Ronin, another second party. And Stellar Blade is something different. The third party relations team that I worked closely when I was doing indie support, they looked at Asia, China, Korea, and, as a future growth region in terms of creating games. And they looked at what Shift Up started working on Project Eve.
Project Eve, right.
And they really liked. And they asked me to, go visit the studios right before the COVID, happened, to check out the game and play the game, and talked with Kim-san, and I became fans and kind of promoted internally that, man, this is great game, sign up, and that was all second party deal. Yeah, so after success of Neo and Neo 2, I think first party and the company, because it's more like seen as a business investment. So the business side were involved, because that was not coming out of what I explained, the first party budget, in my understanding. So the whole company became fan of doing second party titles after Neo and Neo 2, and increased and look at the new opportunities from Korea or China. And some couple of China Hero project will be published by PlayStation. That's second party.
Right. Lost Soul Aside, I guess, is going to be the next one, right?
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you about that. I guess it makes sense now, is how important is the international flavor that Sony has invested in important to the platform and to the identity? Because Stellar Blade's a great example. South Korea is not known for console gaming. It's known for, and even Shift Up is known for its other Goddess Princess game or whatever the hell it's called. But you guys identified it and went there. And I loved the same thing with the China Hero project and games like Fist coming out of there, and Annu Mutationum or whatever that game is, and a bunch of other ones still in development. And then you see the India Hero project launch. Sony makes an investment in Africa with Carry First, which is a huge mobile company there. I feel like Sony deserves a lot of criticism for some of the things it's done, but I think this is a really smart move to go not only find emerging markets to sell your consoles in, but find the native talent that can internationalize the brand. You guys do this, or did, and I don't say you anymore, you're not at Sony anymore, but Sony has done this better than anyone. And I wonder if you agree.
Thank you. The people who are leading these initiatives and the third-party relations would love, be super happy to hear what you said. Yes, third-party relations team really worked hard to identify the potential of development in China many, many years ago, and started China Hero Project, invested in some of the project, and worked with MiHoYo to support the Genshin. Became a huge success.
Right, you guys had Genshin as like a de facto exclusive for many years.
De facto, yeah. That was our people in Shanghai and people in third-party relations globally, work together to support, to cultivate these new relationship for the future. And the thinking I remember was, console market in China was very small, and it's growing, but still, small. But in order for console, so China as a country banned sales of consoles for many years after PS2 generation. So there are lots of people who didn't grow up playing console games in that country. So in order to reinstall, console gaming, the third-party relation team felt that we need local games developed in China. However, because the local market in China for console is so small, it doesn't make sense if they wouldn't consider making games for consoles or PlayStation just for Chinese market. So what they should do, PlayStation should do, is to support the Chinese publishers and developers to become successful globally in the global PlayStation market, because global PlayStation market is large. So by doing so, we will see more games made in China, and that will eventually attract Chinese people to buy PlayStation. So that's the thinking behind. And it worked. It's working very well. The sales of PlayStation has been increasing, PS5 generation way more than PS4 generation. And you may have seen, I saw some news that after the release of Black Myth Wukong last year, there's no PS5 to buy in China.
Right, yeah, they're all saturated. That game killed.
So same way thinking in Korea, and Korea and China are connected, because Korea has had a lot of success on the MMO and mobile games, especially in Chinese market. But Chinese market was closed for a couple of years. They didn't approve new games, right, to release. So Korean publishers and Chinese publishers had to look outside Asia, and they realized, to work to get their games outside in the US or Europe market, they thought they have to work on, they should work on console and PC games. So that was the thinking behind, Korean publishers, and our third-party relations team identified, partners to work with. And India and MENA, Middle East North Africa Hero Project, are the new initiative looking at the future.
Right. I saw an interview, or I read an interview or an excerpt of it with Sean Layden recently, where he was talking about Xbox and how they kind of fell into a trap because of their own making, basically, where they were only big in the Anglosphere, right? And only big in the US, Western Europe, Australia, and that was basically it. And I feel like this is kind of the antithesis of that, which is good. It's like, you got to find new markets for your products. Like I would argue, and I'm sure you guys' data kind of shows this, is that you're probably pretty saturated in the West. It's like, people know what PlayStation is. They're either going to buy one or they don't. But you look at a continent like Africa, which is why no one talked about it except for me, but I was so fascinated by the Carry First investment into African gaming, because I was like, if you look at the at the demography stats over the next 50 years, the only continent that's going to grow is Africa. In other words, the only continent that's going to have more people than it does right now is in 50 years is Africa. You need to go look at all the people there, like look at, and India, 1 billion people, China, 1 billion people. Like you gotta go.
Nigeria will grow, right?
Right.
Like in terms of population.
Right. Exactly. Like I love the idea of extracting games from these markets that are just unusual by our metric. But I wanted to ask you this. Playing around in China requires some self-editing and some conciliatory moves, right? Like I know from one of my games. So one of the games I wrote, I had a little joke about Taiwan in it, and I had to edit it out to publish it on PlayStation. Yeah, now we weren't trying to publish in China, but to even be on PlayStation anywhere, I had to remove this thing about Taiwan, which we did because we were like, we're going to go out of business if we don't sell on PlayStation. Do you think that that's ultimately worth it? Or do you think that maybe there should be some pushback? In other words, like, no, we don't want to do that, or we don't want to self-edit, or is it worth it to get access to that market?
Well, yeah, it depends the degree of edit you have to do, right? Maybe in your case, just mention of Taiwan, removing it wasn't, big thing.
No, it wasn't the end of the world,
Yeah, in that case, that's fine. I remember it's a long time ago on PS2 generation, we were selling PS2 officially in China. And one of our games, we localized to China was Ape Escape game. And you remember each monkey, you capture had a name to it, right? And somehow our translator translated all the monkey names to Chinese name, but not the lead character, Kakeru, as Japanese name, kept it. And the Chinese government, didn't allow the game to come out in China because they said, well, this game making fun of Chinese people like Japanese boy, making all Chinese, mocking them as a monkeys, with all these Chinese names.
That's so interesting. God, I love stories like that. I was reading this is an aside, but I don't know if you've heard of the 3 Body Problem. It's a sci-fi novel. It's a Chinese sci-fi novel. And I was reading, so I read obviously the English Western version of it, but it's out of order. And what they basically did, the beginning of the book is basically a struggle session at a communist thing or whatever. And they're like, this is in the Chinese book, but we buried it in the books so that the censors wouldn't even get that far and they wouldn't read it. And then for the English language versions, we actually popped it into the front where it belonged. And I was like, that's pretty crazy, but interesting. You got to do what you got to do, I guess. I just was curious what you thought about that.
Yeah. There's a sensitivity about some, like a Middle East has different kind of restrictions.
Right. Like that. That's a lot with like homosexuality, gender
something
stuff
related to religion. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's always I guess if you do want to play a global game like Sony's playing, then you have to kind of deal with it. And so as long as it's reasonable,
Yeah.
Plus you guys
so the first step, like I explained, the first step for our team, I left already, but the Sony third party relations teams is to empower the local developers to be able to make their games successful outside their local market. So consideration for the, censorship or some restriction of contents in that region is not the initial kind of consideration.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, way above my pay grade to deal with all the international ramifications of it. I want to talk to you about a specific game. This is a really weird one, but I wonder 2012 game, PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale.
Okay.
Do you feel like there's a future for a Sony mascot game? It doesn't have to be a fighter, but I think a lot of people in our ecosystem wonder how this might be broached again and whether it was kind of a mistake to take kind of the Super Smash Brothers route. And if there's Fortnite, I guess, is the game everyone looks at as like the metaverse of metaverses, right? Everyone's in it. Do you look at the Sony pantheon of characters and feel like it would fit in a specific game that can celebrate all of them? Would it be another fighting game? Could it be a racing game, a shooter? I wonder if you've thought about that, or if you guys ever considered following PlayStation All-Stars up with some different kind of product.
Well, in my day, we didn't try a game, but last year's Astrobot did something really amazing to include so many IPs inside the game as characters. And some of the IPs, well, actually they recreated a kind of gameplay, like Ape Escape, you catch the bots, or, in Uncharted level, you swing, and God of War, you throw the axe. That was amazing. But in terms of, PlayStation All-Stars, that was my time. I clearly remember, we had some experts in making fighting games, in the team.
Seth Killian, right? Came over from Capcom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you know so well. And, I felt the game was good, but, the game had a little, was differentiated in terms of gameplay, like how you can only score with a special attack,
right.
And so it's not as accessible as Super Smash Brothers. But if the game had the exact same rule as Super Smash Brothers, people just called it, this is a copy.
Right.
So in my mind, there's no win kind of situation. If we do Smash, people criticize. If we don't Smash, people have hard time learning how to play.
That was a fun game to cover at IGN because it was, I don't know if you remember, first of all, like there were so many leaks. There was like this one guy that leaked so much of it. And then we would his name was Paul Gale. I remember it. And, okay. And we would make like the fake rosters, like who could be in the game. And I thought the rosters were actually pretty good. I remember going down there to see Seth right before the game, I guess, had the plug pulled on it to see DLC that I think never came out. And yeah, I've always just wondered, I'm like, yeah, there's a cause to celebrate PlayStation like this. I just wonder how it would be done. Astrobot's a good example, but my regret about that game, and I wonder if they'll take this into advisement in a future one if they do it, is like, I would have loved to see more of a museum component where it's like, if you see Rudy from Wild Arms, but you don't know him, their game will not tell you anything about him. The game won't tell you what game he came from. And I was like, yeah, it would have been cool. Smash Brothers does this really well, actually, where it's like the whole museum component. This is the date. This is the game. I would have loved something more like that, but I did love the winks and the nods. And I was getting a little frustrated when I would occasionally encounter him. Like, I don't even know who the hell this is.
Yeah,
I'd have to go look it up.
It was almost like a game by itself, right? So we captured this. I captured this, but I kind of see, but I really cannot remember the name. And it almost became a game by itself. But I think, yeah, that's a great suggestion. And to me, that team is small, right? Like, 50 people or so. And they had like 150 guest, characters in the game. So they bandwidth wise, they are not able to manage it. But if the game had that, museum component, that would have been amazing, as you say.
Yeah, it would have just been, I did like on the PSN, on the store, they eventually had a thing where it's like, here are all the games. So you can go and look and buy them or whatever. But that was the one thing where I was like, yeah, it's a good celebration, but it's subtle as opposed to something more like PlayStation All-Stars that was not subtle at all. So yeah, I just wondered if you ever thought about that. What else here? God, I got so many other things. I wanted to ask you about PlayStation's Japanese identity. One of the things that some gamers criticize is that it seems like Japan is less important to PlayStation than it's ever been. Obviously, Asobi made Astrobot. That's a Japanese game, but Japan Studio is gone. And all of the incubation that went on there, the many different games that came out of there from different teams. And I'm wondering if that resonates with you at all, that the brand seems more international. Now, we were just talking about how important it is to be international, but I wonder if is PlayStation missing a certain Japanese flavor these days that it used to have that it doesn't anymore?
Well, during my time, people gives me so much credit, but one of the things, I was not successful as have, amazing, successful service game that we talked about, right? And another thing was I was not able to have amazingly successful games made in Japan. Except, Gran Turismo, the Polyphony,
right.
kept
the most
making
successful
great
game.
games.
Yeah.
But other than, Gran Turismo, we had many, good products, but didn't really have a AAA level successful product. That became more and more important as the market became like, how do you call it? The big games became bigger.
Right.
And the indies, filled all the gap, and AA market seems to, have disappeared.
Right.
And many, most of franchises, IPs that Japan Studio had were in that, smaller AA size group. And the market became really difficult for these kind of games. And the for example, Toyama-san, right? Keiichiro Toyama, who did the, Silent and Gravity Rush.
And now Slitterhead, right? Is that the...
Yeah. Great creator. Mm-hmm. But after Gravity Rush 2, he tried to come up with new concept, but we are not able to greenlight any of his new concept, even though they were really interesting. In my mind, I remember his product looked like something that company wouldn't support in terms, because company were really looking for AAA titles. So we really struggled to get the game going with him. So when he, Japan studio was shut down and he became independent with team members as Boca Game Studios, he was able to create and release, Slitterhead. And the game, of course, came out on PlayStation as well. So by him and his team becoming independent, we are able to enjoy his new games on PlayStation now. So in a sense, and other members also, former Japan studio members who are not part of Asobi team Asobi, went into many different teams in Japan. And you know about Ratatan, right?
That's the new Patapon?
That's the new game by the creator of Patapon. Right. So, if he stayed in Japan studios, probably Ratatan wouldn't have been greenlit.
Right.
So considering all this, I'm very happy that, these people who left Japan studio now working on new IPs, and now their games are will be playable on on all platforms, including PlayStation. Because these smaller games need multi-platform release, in my mind, to be successful.
Right. One of the great Japanese games, I think, of the last couple of generations that you helped lock down and shepherd was Death Stranding. And I'm so excited about the sequel. I just absolutely love the first game.
Don't give me credit for Kojima-san's game.
Oh, of course.
He doesn't need,
Right. But
help.
You helped lubricate the wheels on getting him with PlayStation. So I feel like there is still really good Japanese stuff coming. I think there is a perception issue.
That particular initiative was Angel House initiative. Andy and Kojima-san agreed upon, and Andy asked me to support the project. And so Mark Cerny took Kojima-san to visit all the studios, and one studio, Guerrilla Games, Harman, agreed to lend the engine.
Decima?
Decima engine. So that, Kojima-san's team can shorten the, development cycle for Death Stranding. So that's all that I did.
Yeah, fair enough. I wanted to make the point that, we are getting good Japanese games. I just think that there is a perception issue, like where it seemed more international than people would have liked. But I just was curious what you think of that. A similar thing I wanted to ask you was kind of the centralizing of PlayStation in the United States, which happened while you were still or at least in process when you were still in charge of first party, as opposed to kind of the separation between SCE, SCEJ, SCEA, and so on and so forth. Do you think that that's been largely? I guess, I mean, the money says it's been largely successful, but do you think culturally that that's been a successful move as well to decide to put it in San Mateo as kind of?
Yeah, that was a logical choice, because the market, US is the biggest market, and all new innovations seems to happening technically in the US, and we have the largest, number of studios in the US as well. So and the biggest reason for the globalization was, of course, the, digital distribution. The market was changing from package business that needed very local presence of sales and distribution and, and the customer support to digital distribution, which, you can sell your game everywhere in the world. So with seeing that future shift coming, companies' decision to globalize and big change from region-based headquarters to one global company, in my mind, was necessary. And Andrew House started the process, and Jim Ryan completed the process in my mind. So, and the choice of US as a new headquarters seemed logical to me. I worked in the US for 8 years, while you remember.
Right, of course.
And I felt that, innovation was happening in the US, and, here's the biggest market. So, yeah, and as a market, Japan has become much, much smaller. Now it's less than 10%, I think, in terms of PlayStation install base. It used to be like 1/3 of Japan, right. US, and Europe is now less than 10%. But still, there are large number of game developers in Japan creating games, and like last year's Game Award, out of the nominees of Game of the Year, there are 6 nominees, and I think 4 are Japanese games.
Yeah.
Games from Japan, and 1 was, Chinese game, and 1 was Baratro.
Right. Yes. That's an interesting point. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was, that was my favorite for sure, but.
Metaphor and Astrobot and DLC of Elden Ring.
Oh, Elden Ring, yeah.
So there are still very strong presence from game development standpoint, but as a market, Japan is much smaller now for console. Anyway, so I think it's a necessary change. Now, when you release a new game, like a big game, majority of the sales happen on digital. And it's every year, it's just increasing the pie. And the package business become almost look like a hobbyist. Some people really like to own the package. So I don't think that will go away, but it will just continue to be smaller part of business. And all the information on the internet are global, right? You see news, everywhere from anywhere. And think about in old days, PS1, PS2 days, we used to have different names for the same game. Like
right.
Hot Shots Golf was everybody's golf, right?
Right.
How wasteful it is for a company to invest in 2 brands. But it made sense in the old package business days, because the media was local and distribution was local, marketing activity, everything was local at that time. But now it's all global. And the campaign was different, right? Each region had different tagline for PlayStation. right?
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And it's not really, it's not only PlayStation either. There's a lot of Dragon Warrior and Dragon Quest, Biohazard and Resident Evil.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I know some of that was because of like weird IP stuff, but yeah, they should have just been more unified. And I think that the game was kind of up where it was clear Sony was mega focused on the US, and I think reasonably so because of Xbox 360 when PS4 launched first in the US. Before anywhere else, because they could only allocate resources to one place, and they just chose the United States. It seemed like it was pretty obvious at that point that was what they were going to focus on.
Let me explain. The way the company is set up in SIE now is whoever the head is the headquarter for that function. The overall company US is headquarter, but Jim Ryan used to be in London, right? Based in London. And Harman is based in Amsterdam. And people may not know that head of PS Store, based in London. And hardware team, naturally, is based in Japan, right? Headquarter. So the different function has a different region of headquarter. And sometimes it may shift, when the head of that function change or move on or even relocate. So not everything is centered to US. Each function has different headquarter almost, and the company is flexible enough to assign most talented people wherever that person is located.
It makes sense. I didn't know Herman was still in. I guess it makes sense, but he was still in the Netherlands.
Amsterdam.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you. So I know you weren't going to. You said like we can't get into confidential stuff. I'm not going to ask you anything like that. But there are a couple of canceled games that we know exist that I wanted to ask you about. And I know some of them were brought up in the MinMax interview. I'm not going to ask you about those particular games. One game I wanted to ask you about, and I guess this goes into how you know when it's time to pull the plug, even when something's far along, is the Sucker Punch game Prophecy, or at least that's what its codenamed was. This leaked. The reason people know is because they're, and I don't know how many people do, but you can find 12 minutes of gameplay of this online.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it looks great, by the way. Like, it looks totally awesome. You can see a little bit of Ghost of Tsushima in it. So I understand that that's kind of like a natural evolution towards Ghost. But how does a game get that far? And I encourage people to go look at the gameplay. And then you pull the plug on it. What's that like? And
so that plug was pulled by Sucker Punch. We were supporting the project, and one day, Brian came to visit.
Brian Fleming.
Connie Booth. Yeah, Brian Fleming, the head of Sucker Punch, and Connie Booth, head of San Mateo Studio, was supporting the Sucker Punch. They came to me and said that let us show the latest build of that game. And I saw it, I played it. And by the way, we would like to cancel this project. I was like, what?
It was a lot of work went into that. Like,
yeah. But I was explaining that they worked hard and they got the game up and running and playing well. Sucker Punch, they always make games play well. I really love what they do in terms of gameplay. But they said that they are not able to come to this core thing that becomes a pillar of the IP. The central theme or why people get to, choose this game other than, other games in terms of themes and plot. And at the same time, they came up with this idea. They said, we are a huge fan of all Japanese movies, like Kurosawa movies, and we want to make this game, turn this game into what has become Ghost of Tsushima.
Right.
But they wanted to ask me if it's okay for a Western studio to work on Japan-themed product. And I said, oh, don't worry. Japanese market is so small.
Plus, if you do it right, you're going to, they did it right. And so that people really love it there, right? So that
surprised Brian that I said so. But we had a setup that, we are lucky to have a Japanese producer that Sony hired from Japan studio. Shuhei is a Japanese, based in the US and became the producer for Ghost of Tsushima. And we had the localization team in Japan studio who worked on Ghost of Tsushima, and myself involved. Look at the game in product development and look at the storyline and look at the art. It's hard for Western team to understand this is coming from Japan, this is coming from China, this is coming from Vietnam, without localized. So we helped all these, remove this is China, this, bamboo shouldn't be alone, standing here, or all these things.
Right.
Feedback to Sucker Punch, and Sucker Punch team, visited Tsushima, a couple of times, and all the research and collaboration made the game to the point that Japanese audience really appreciated. And I think it was announced that the game Ghost of Tsushima sold over 1 million units in Japan alone. Wow. And that was a huge accomplishment. Made me so proud, because I don't remember Western game from first party sold over 1 million units after Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, I was going to say, Japan's population is 120 million people. So to sell a million copies of that game is great. Yeah. It's impressive.
Yeah, So that's how, Sucker Punch team didn't see the potential with that initial project.
The other canceled game I wanted to ask you about is something that, at least publicly, is much less known about it, though I was I was the person that broke its cancellation at IGN and the layoffs that came from it. But the Santa Monica space game that was canceled. Why? So I remember having a conversation with Shannon.
Was it leaked or,
Yeah, someone that was on the team text messaged me and was like, we just had a bunch of layoffs and the game is and I was like, okay, so I wrote it. And then I went from there, but that
was a tough one.
Yeah, I'm interested in this because I remember talking to Shannon Studstill, for people that don't know, used to run Santa Monica Studio. And I remember talking to her and I'm like, why are you guys so precious about talking about this? In other words, because no one would talk about it. It was and I know it was really difficult for the studio, but I remember arguing with her not arguing, but telling her I was in her office and I was like, it would be really instructive to people to talk about why it didn't work. What happened? What went wrong? What did you have? Why didn't you want to move forward with it? Can you explain any more about what went wrong with this game? And because as I understand, and it might have not been true, but as I understand, that was the most expensive cancellation, or at least one of the most that Sony ever had.
I talked about I canceled 2 games after we spent $25 million, and one which was that one. And at that time, that was huge cancellation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, 25 million sounds like a, normal thing. Yeah. But at the time, it was a big project. We had new IP. It was very, very interesting premise storyline.
It was by the guy that wrote Battlestar Galactica, right? Robert Moore, whatever his name is, something like that.
Our game director was the game director of God of War 3. Really talented. Yeah, Stig. Yeah. Stig. Yeah, so Stig, after God of War 3, he wanted to work on new IP. We joke that every God of War game, every God of War game had a different game director. Like Dave Jaffe, right. Cory Barlog, and Stig. Actually, Cory Barlog came back to direct another game. Right. So, he was the first game director, did 2 God of War games. Anyway, what went wrong? Yeah, so the, storyline was very interesting, and the graphic was great, and game was obviously playable. I don't remember what went wrong. Probably it's another case of they didn't find the core gameplay. Yeah. So different from Sucker Punch's situation. I think the problem was the gameplay. They couldn't come to really strong gameplay idea. IP was very interesting that I remember.
Yeah, I wonder. I haven't talked to Shannon in a long time. Because I know I'm good friends with Jaffe, and I know Jaffe's good friends with Shannon. So I need to make that connection at some point.
Talking about Shannon and the Santa Monica studio, I like to correct one thing with you.
Please.
Because I happen to see a short video that you post on X, right? The only part of your...
Yeah, I was doing that, yeah. And not so much anymore.
Yeah. So one of that was talking about me. Thank you for doing it. But in that video, you talked about a part of one scene of the Raising Kratos movie about, God of War 2018. Right. I think you mentioned something like, Shuhei didn't understand how good that game was, or something like that.
Well, there's a story about how you didn't like it, right? Or something like that, but I don't know. But
yeah. Right. So I like to correct it.
Okay, yeah.
Because some people criticize me that Shuhei didn't really understand that God of War was great. No, that was not the case. That game was going to be the biggest game for the Christmas. 2017.
Yeah.
The game was planned to launch in October of that year. And my visit to Santa Monica Studio when I played the game was like early springtime. And when I played the game with all the, big anticipation from the company and myself included for the game, I was like, the team cannot finish this, in a good state. And the AAA marketing, is a big machine, right? When it starts rolling, we cannot, take it back. So that's the reason, I didn't speak to Corey at that point because it was more a business issue. So I went back to Shannon's office and said, we have a problem. The team need more time. So we worked with the company and were able to push it, move it out. And the game came out, I think, April.
Yeah, it was spring,
2018.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So gave the team six more months and became the team was able to push the game to the final quality.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's not like I didn't understand the game was good, but I totally had I did understand the game was not good enough for the October launch of that year.
Well, certainly your instincts are generally, your instincts are immaculate in some sense. You have a great amount of experience, but certainly you're going to get some stuff wrong, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
many times.
I'm always fascinated by, and you and I have talked about it way in the past, but just Demon Souls, the original Demon Souls. Like to me, that's an obvious miss, right? Like letting Atlas kind of publish that in the West. And then
no. Let me explain.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I became the president of our studio in May of 2008, and I moved back to Japan in fall of that year, maybe August or September. And the game was Demon Souls was developed from software and produced by Japan studio. So I kind of succeeded the product and towards the end. And we had the game at Tokyo Game Show. And I played the game. I got the, game in development. And by that time, there's no Souls-like game because Demon Souls was the pioneering game. And it was, my mistake. I didn't get the producer to explain the whole, purpose of this game, what Miyazaki-san and the team was trying to accomplish. And I just got the game and I played the game. And after 2 hours, I was still standing at the beginning of the game. Yeah. So it was very unfortunate that I didn't find the route to come back down and open up the door. If I found that, my impression would have been different. But when I played the game and spent 2 hours and still standing at the beginning, I felt like, as an action game, the game balance was so broken. So I remember I told the like a QA guy who gave me the code that, well, this game is too hard. But by that time, actually, the game was already passed by SCA and SC Europe. Yeah, so at that time, we had 3 different publishers, Japan, US, and Europe.
Right.
And way before the game gets complete, we show the game each other and we, decide to publish this game or not publish because the marketing takes a long time, right? So before I got the responsibility of Demon Souls, SCA and SC Europe, the publishing side had passed on that game. And even for the game, when it came out in Japan, the initial sales was very, very small because people didn't understand.
Right. I didn't understand it.
So
I didn't get it when we played it.
Yeah. When the game came out, but it got the cult following and more people, started to talk about the game. But because the game was passed on by SCA and SC Europe, we, when that happens, we take the game to other publishers in the US and Europe for publication. And luckily, Atlas and Namco took it for US and European market.
Right.
Because we needed to recoup a little bit. So by the time the game came out in the US, the games got a really great reputation because of the word of mouth. And the game kept selling in Japan because people realized the true, nature of the game. And I remember when GameSpot, I think, game Demon Souls Game of the Year. Like each publication had its own, Game of the Year, right? Well, they still may do that. So GameSpot the Game of the Year, Demon Souls, published by Atlas. I remember I sent the link of the article to the head of marketing of SCA. See what you did. Yeah. And he replied with just saying, ouch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame. This is such a funny connection to the story in that, I was on IGN PlayStation with Greg and others at the time, and our bosses came to us because we didn't review Demon Souls when it came out. We didn't even review it. We didn't send it to a freelancer. And a few weeks later, it's like, our bosses came up to us like, are you guys going to review this, like, this game that's getting these great scores? And we're like, oh, all right. So we sent it to Sam Bishop, who ended up working at PlayStation later. And I think we gave like a 9.3 or something like that. But it is an interesting what if, of like,
yeah.
So Bandai Namco was all over that after that, I guess, with Dark Souls.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my mistake was, when we realized the game was great after so many months of Demon Souls release, From Software was already working on sequel, but they were so disappointed by how, PlayStation treated. They didn't even publish in the US and Europe.
Interesting.
Right? So, we wanted to work with them again, but they passed on. And the Namco did offer to joint ownership of IP.
Which is big.
So if they changed the IP, so they changed the name from Demon Souls to Dark Souls.
And then you were able to court them back with Bloodborne, I guess. So you made everything better.
Yeah. We kept we had a huge respect for Miyazaki-san, and we were able to work with him again. And and Bloodborne is one of his best games, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only Souls game I could really wrap my mind around. I'm not talented enough for these kinds of games, but I did like Bloodborne. I actually remember playing Bloodborne. Who was the female producer? Yumi. She worked out of Sony US, but she spoke Japanese. Anyway, I remember she watched me play Bloodborne at San Mateo and was like laughing because I was like so bad at it. She's the same person actually where I played Gran Turismo once and was like horrible, and she laughed at me there too. So it happens.
That's me.
Yeah. I know we're going long. I just want to, if you don't mind, I just want to ask you a couple more things. Okay. And then I'll obviously let you go. So I'm wondering, you were talking earlier, and this is connecting to something we talked about a while ago, but I definitely want to pick your brain about this, is the idea of this games as a service initiative and like the post Shuhei era of first party would get these two silos of money right? One for single player games that you're already making that are becoming more expensive, obviously. And then this heavy initiative into games as a service, 10 or 12 games, which I don't think was a bad idea, by the way. I did a whole video about why I think it's good to spread the field and try. The one, so we know now from you that there's no money issue, but I wonder what you think about the allocation of resources issue. The one thing that so when we saw the new Housemarque game, Saros or whatever, I was like, oh, thank Christ, because it looks
that's a good allocation of money,
right? Exactly, and it's like, oh, I'm surprised they're not making a MOBA or something, But hearing Bluepoint, this vaunted studio that remakes games and remasters games, now they're making an original God of War game. Naughty Dog making The Last of Us Online, which was a really strange choice. Not because, so I know people, I'm sure you've played it too, but I've known people that have played it, and it's supposed to be great.
Yeah, I played it and it was great.
And that's what I was told too. Is like, it's great. It's really great. But this idea that Naughty Dog kind of, and I don't know if you remember this statement where they're like, we realize that this game is going to consume us basically. And I'm like, but you just spent like 3 or 4 years on it. And like all of this money and resources and time, you announced it. So we know that the money's not the problem, but I wonder what you think on the outside is the allocation of resources, because it seems like that's a major thing with people. Bend is another example, right? Where it's like, we're not going to hear from these two teams now, Bend, Bluepoint, a few others, until PS6, I assume. And that's the real shame. And I'm wondering what you think of that. In other words, should Sony have really invested that extra money into other teams and let the teams as they were constituted make the games that they're better known for?
Yeah, well, you can always say if they didn't do that, they might be, doing really great things.
Monday morning quarterbacking, as they call it.
Yeah. Well, I was not involved in the, those decision making, right, other than I know that Naughty Dog, Last of Us Online the idea came from Naughty Dog. They really wanted to make it, and they are making a great game. But probably one of the results of acquiring Bungie, and Bungie explain what it takes to maintain the service games, Naughty Dog realized, oops, we cannot do that. If we had to do it, we cannot make, Intergalactic, I guess.
Right.
That was the choice. So that was lack of understanding of what it takes.
Foresight, as it were. Yeah,
foresight, And in terms of Bluepoint and Bend Studio, or for that matter, like a London studio before that, working on service games, right? That was cancelled. I was not involved in that decision making, but from my experience, when studios see the company has a big initiative, riding on that initiative give you a better chance of getting approved and supported, right? Yeah, studios want to make their, dream games, but, oftentimes they have multiple ideas they can pursue, and they see, which way the company is going. The company management really want to see the, a service game successful, or VR game successful, or, portable game successful. They may go like, well, out of these ideas, let's propose this one, to ride on that initiative.
Right.
So, some of these studios' idea might have been chosen from that instead of, Harman or whoever is telling you have to make service games.
Yeah.
So it could be like a mutual.
That makes sense to me, Shu, because it's the thing that frustrated me, and maybe this is like someone sitting at a desk not knowing anything, but when Naughty Dog canceled the game, what was strange to me was that they didn't, or the powers that be weren't like, well, we don't have to cancel it. Like, we have a lot here, and it's almost ready to go, basically, to be shown properly. And I guess I'm just surprised that they didn't go, like, Jim Ryan or whoever, or Herman didn't go and say, like, who's really passionate here about this game? Can we spin off a team of 50 or whatever, or 40 or whatever you need to kind of just support this thing once it's out, and it's Naughty Dog North or whatever. And then everyone else that isn't just stays and works on Intergalactic and the next Last of Us or whatever. That was the bigger surprise to me because I don't like when Lucid's Twisted Metal game got canceled. It's like, well, that's not a huge surprise. Destruction All Stars wasn't that great. People don't like whatever. That makes sense. Or Ben canceling their game. But again, it's just because I, like you said, it's like, I know people who played it and it was like, it was good to go. And that's the thing that frustrates me the most is like, damn, that was just a lot of wasted time, you know? And resources.
That question has to be answered by Harman.
Right. Yeah, no, I know it's not. I'm picking your brain as someone who has the experience, though you didn't make the decisions. Because as we said earlier.
My guess is what it would, so game might be ready to launch or launch soon or get into the, public beta or like that. But when management of the studio or, studio management about that knew what it takes after they release, they thought that, well, it's better not to even get into the beta.
Yeah, I get it. It's just, God, what a shame because you just can't get, it's the money's like this ephemeral thing, but the time, you can't get the time back.
Yeah.
And that's and all the effort, which is a bummer. Yeah. And I'm surprised that none of it's leaked. I think that
especially for teams who are not making service games before, trying to work on, service game and eventually got canceled is a bit, bit sad.
Yeah, it's hard, but we'll see. I mean, what did you think about the reaction? You brought it up and we can go after this, but the reaction, and again, this isn't a game I don't think you greenlit, although I could be wrong, is Intergalactic.
No.
Yeah, that was way after you, I would imagine. I was,
I 100% agree with you, Colin.
Yeah.
I did listen to your comment in the long, your usual long
my
podcast.
diatribes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Naughty Dog, right? It's third person action game. Please come on, people believe, they'll make amazing, great game.
Yeah.
That's my impression.
Because a game that you're much more intimately involved with, which is The Last of Us Part 2, is like one of my favorite games. And it's crazy to me that people think that they made that and then they're not going to, like, it would be incredible for them to release a 7. It's like, that's not going to happen. That would be so unusual. So yeah, I just think people are so hard on so little. And I feel like once they show gameplay, which I imagine will be sometime this year, that everyone's going to turn around pretty quick on it, but we'll see. I have one random postscript I want to ask you about that was in my notes. This is totally random. Did you ever play with the PS3 Boomerang controller? Did you ever play with it?
No, that was not functional.
Yeah, so it was never functioning. That
That was a mock-up.
Well, I know that I remember at E3 it was behind glass or whatever, but that was it in 05, I guess they showed the controller, or was it 06?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think 05.
So they had time to like kind of get back to the old form factor. But yeah, I'm so curious about that controller. Like what the hell that thing was, but
and the initial announcement, the PS3 had 2 HDMI ports.
Right. So much expense. And then later you tell Greg that they cut an HDMI port out of the Vita to save money. So it's funny how things change so quickly.
Yeah.
It's funny because you'll remember is that I used to play with you guys had Vitas with HDMI outs because I used to capture footage with them and they were secret. Like you weren't allowed to tell anyone that they existed. They weren't allowed to be on film or anything like that. I was like, that's so funny. Well, Shu, I appreciate your time. I mean, I have so much more to ask you. Can I bother you later in the year and maybe we can do it again?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. Again, congratulations on an amazing career at Sony. I'm excited to see what you do next. You're going to be, it's hard for me to believe that people aren't knocking your door down. I would imagine that you're having some interesting conversations with people. I'll be very intrigued to see who.
Well, I'm super excited and happy to, so I agree with a couple of indie publishers and indie developers that I've been very friend with for many years. I become an advisor for them. So I'll be able to work with them, younger, very talented group of people helping and publishing amazing indie games. So I'll be on the other side working on indie games going forward.
And I love that you can pursue your, I thought this was really, I loved your candor with in the kind of funny interview where you're like, I was paid very well, so I don't need to worry about the economics. Like I can really pursue my passion and like what seems right. And I think that that's really exciting. And I think you earned that. So many congratulations to you. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I hope you had a good time. I hope the questions were good.
Yeah. Really, really great questions. That's Colin Moriarty questions.
I appreciate that, Shu. Well, everyone can find you on Twitter, of course, or X as it's called now, and we'll be keeping a close eye out. And I'll reach out to you again like in the summer, and maybe we can get something on the books, because I'm sure I'll think of another million things that I want to ask you about in the meantime. But Shu, thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Be well. And thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand Media. Sacred Symbols. Patreon.com/LastStandMedia for early ad-free access. LastStandMedia.store for merch. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.